All right, we should be live. Welcome to Leaving Young Earth Creationism with Grand Admiral Thrawnmulus.
Hello.
Now, you seem to have changed your skin and eye color.
I I am usually blue. However, in the interest of Earth relations, I have taken a more human skin tone.
All right. Well, in case anyone hasn't seen one of these before, this is Leaving Young Earth Creationism, where I talk with a former Young Earth creationist about their time as a Young Earth creationist and what it was like to get out and what got them to come out of Young Earth creationism and all that good stuff. Um, just before we go, a quick few channel things. Right now, it's looking like Tuesday is good for another Kent with Ment. Thursday will be the last episode of Fluffy Dino Lads. Saturday, I'm having Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal, a professor and virologist, on to talk about viruses and what a virus is, how they work, how they evolve, and also what we can learn from virology about our current situation and what we can learn from our current situation about virology, because those two things connect to each other. So, there's cool stuff coming. And hello to everyone who's in the chat. I'm seeing Icarus, TD Lane, Thrawnmulus, Kakarot, Random Evo Times, Portuguese Eagle, Monk Mayfair, my goodness. Tyler West. And do be aware, guys, 4 more channel members, and we get to add in a new emoji, and it will be Mothra. So if you are anxious to get that Mothra emoji, feel free to join. It starts at $1.99, and that gets you access to the membership Discord server, which is not the same as the fan Discord server. It is a much smaller group. It will also get you access to early videos and all the emojis. So there you go. But that's enough of that. Thrawn, may I call you Thrawn?
You can.
Okay. Thrawn, so how old were you when you became a Young Earth creationist?
Depending on what you mean by Young Earth creationist, I was born into it.
Okay.
Though if by accepting and being able to acknowledge the consequences of the belief, I was around 7.
Okay. So would you say it's fair that there was never a time when you were actively not a Young Earth creationist? There were just times where you were unable to really conceive of the difference between that and anything else?
Yes. I was brought up very much in the authority figures have told us this, so this is how the world is, and there are other ideas. However, they are wrong because our authority figures have said they are wrong.
Yeah. Okay. And so I suppose this was at least your immediate family were all, I assume, going to a church that was a Young Earth creationist church?
Yes. The entire church was Young Earth creationist, and we would every so often have I don't know exactly what you would call it, but it was kind of like sponsored by Answers in Genesis, where either I do believe there were 2 times where Ken Ham himself came to our church to give a talk.
Oh, wow.
And there were a couple events that were over the course of a week. We would watch a different Kent Ham video, and he had the whole kind of like the Kent Ham, the Kent Hovind seminars, but better produced and more concise, and it would go over why we can't allow evolution to be true.
Okay. So, actually, that does remind me. Were there other creationists besides Ken Ham that were a big influence on the church, or was it a very AIG heavy?
Early on, it was very heavily AIG, but there were a couple people who would bring up Kent Hovind every so often. My family did not like Kent Hovind, and so it wasn't until a little bit after I found out about YouTube that I was able to look him up, and until I was about 16, I didn't really think anything of Kent Hovind until I started looking into Ian Juby, and I really liked Ian Juby at the start. He seemed to be a lot more into the science, where Ken Ham would be more about what the Bible says about these topics. And after watching Genesis Week for a while, Kent Hovind would pop up in my recommendations, and I would watch one or two of his videos.
Okay. All right. And so, how did you end up finding Ian Juby?
Um, it was really as simple as YouTube confirms your bias. So I was having a struggle with a friend of mine who in college, and he was like, "This is evolution, and this is what's true." And so I went to look for an up-to-date resource on why creationism is true, and YouTube fed me what I needed at the time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that's, YouTube, it can be like that. It notices you like something and it will just keep recommending it. And it's,
Yes.
that's actually the story behind how a lot of people end up getting into a lot of crazy stuff. Like, pretty much every flat earther out there started with watching a few flat earth videos, and then YouTube was like, "Oh, you like these, huh? Well, here's more."
Yes. It was around that same time that Angry Flat Earther and Nephilim Free and Dubay started popping up in my recommendations, and I would just watch their videos, and I knew enough about why the Earth is round at the time to be like, no, that's wrong.
Oh, so it actually, if you had just been a little bit dumber, you might have ended up full on in the flat Earth
I
camp, huh?
might have. That is a little bit scary.
Okay. Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned Nephilim Free, because he's in sort of a halfway house between flat Earth and not flat Earth, because he's a geocentrist.
He used to be a geocentrist. I thought he denounced that.
Well, he's now a Milky Way centrist.
Okay.
So, which is also
That
dumb.
kind of makes sense because of our perspective in the Big Bang. Though if we were in Andromeda, we would be Andromeda centrists.
Right. If you were anywhere else, it would always look like you're at the center of it. And but yeah, he still thinks that quantized redshifts are a thing, which they're not.
Mm-mm.
And that therefore the Milky Way is the center of everything.
If you've seen, I don't remember who it was anymore, but there was a bunch of flat Earth comps back in 2016 that I watched, and Nephilim was in there agreeing with flat Earth and spouting ideas that would require the speed of light to be so fast as to vapor the light itself. No other form of radiation would vaporize the planet.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and actually, we're getting. Apparently, T Lane said that Nephilim is still posting geocentrist stuff in after show channels on in his channel. So that's interesting.
It's really weird because, as far as I know, he's publicly recanted on that. He was never a geocentrist.
Well, except for all the footage of him saying he was a geocentrist, right?
I don't get it.
So, I don't want to focus too much on that because,
Right.
as far as I can tell, you were never really heavily influenced by Nephilim Free, were you?
No.
Okay.
During my teenage years, it was 90% Ian Juby, and I think right before I started community college, I bought the answers books. I have them somewhere here in my room.
Oh, cool. Those. So I actually recently just saw the books that Kent Hovind is selling for $75.
That's a ripoff.
It looks like ridiculously pathetic compared to the answers books. Those are at least hefty to some degree, and this little stack that he's giving looks like what you get for like $35 in the kids section at like Barnes and Noble or something, and he's like charging $75 for that crap.
No, I paid less than $75 for all 4 answers books.
Yeah. All right. So, so I want to get this straight. So, up until about teenage years, where you started watching a lot of creationist YouTube, you were pretty influenced by AIG, and then it shifted over to
Mhm.
Ian Juby. And that's interesting because actually, I don't meet a lot of young Earth creationists who cite Juby as a major influence on them. He seems to be a little, I guess, niche.
I would agree. Even a lot of the other creationists that I would talk to at church, who would actually uh, like read up on Snelling and Georgia and stuff that they had written before they started almost exclusively for AIG. Nobody really heard of him, and he really presents himself as like the counter Bill Nye, as more of a science communicator than a scientist, even though he's not really a science communicator.
Yeah, he's actually. I believe I've covered him twice. I did once on my birthday, and then once a while back, not long after I was a guest on FTFE's channel.
Hmm.
So I did one where Ian Juby was talking about the impossibility of the evolution of sexual reproduction.
Yeah, Ian's sex video, that is a watching it again was just I needed face protection.
Yeah. Well, I have a video about it in case you haven't seen it. It's
I have
yeah,
I've seen Aaron Raw's response to it, even though Aaron Raw didn't know it's a response to it. Um, Somebody else has responded to him. He gets a few responses from smaller channels. The bigger people seem to just overlook him. He's a sleeper, um, especially back between 2011 and or 2010, whenever Genesis Week started, and 2015 when he had the last episode of Genesis Week. He affected a lot of people,
hmm.
and some of them are still around, very much defending him. Like if I comment on an Ian video now, George Bond will respond almost immediately.
Wow. That's how does it? How do they even know? Like, can you set up alerts for comments on other people's channels? I guess you must be able
I
to.
I don't know. One of I don't know if this is correct or not, but it might be that George Bond is a sock puppet account for Ian. I
I guess
cannot.
that could be. But I would wonder why Ian doesn't just bother doing it himself.
I don't know. He doesn't do his own comments. I don't think he's ever responded to his own comments, even though he will post them in his videos.
Hmm. Okay. Odd. But then, so from Ian Juby, you found out about Kent Hovind, but he was never a big thing for you, or
No, I found out about him right after he went to jail, and I asked around my church and my parents. A couple people at church liked him because of how he had influenced them into coming into young Earth creationism. But my parents were always like, there's something fishy about him. And after he went to jail, they were like, yeah, he was doing some shifty things with his money, pretending that his amusement park was a church and all is not something that a Christian should be doing.
okay, yeah. Well, it's good to hear that there are some lay level Christians who are iffy on Hovind because I find that he is like the larger names in professional creationism, like CMI or AIG or ICR. They basically won't touch him with a 10-foot pole.
Oh, I
But
wouldn't touch anyone who thinks that the Ica stones are real with a 10-foot pole.
right,
If I have a reputation to hold, UFO rocks are not something that I want to talk about.
I know. Oh, he also went into the Tolima airplane. Do you know about the Tolima airplane?
Yes, I saw. So actually, while I was doing Young Earth Creationist stuff, there's this. I think it's Chris White or whatever. He's a Christian, and he was debunking ancient aliens,
Yeah.
and he went over that. He also went over Pumapunku, and He also brought my attention to the guy that built Stonehenge in his backyard,
Hmm.
and that showed me just how easy it is to lift huge amounts of weight with Stone Age technology.
Yeah, it's actually not as crazy as you think. Um,
And even if you don't have rollers and sand, you can move something from point A across to point B simply by pivoting it.
yeah, as long as you can get one end even a little bit up off the ground, suddenly you can use mechanical advantage and pivot points and levers, and it all becomes a whole lot easier. Um,
Archimedes, man,
right,
just give me a big enough lever.
and I'll move the world. Yep, it's true, and it's interesting that there's this cross pollination between young Earth creationism and like ancient astronauts and even the flat Earth stuff, and it all just kind of percolates because there's a lot of crossover between some of these people. Like,
It all
there's a
depend it all depends on how literally you interpreting the Bible literally. Be,
it's
because
true.
because they're well, the Nephilim, they were great men of old, and aliens could do things that humans can't do because you have to be so advanced to get here. So of course the Nephilim were aliens.
Right.
And it the earth hangs on nothing. Well, a flat earth wouldn't hang on anything. And go down a line long enough, you will get to all of the rabbit holes.
Yeah. Well, and there's a reason that I compare young Earth creationism to flat Earth. They're both absurd ideas that are equally plausible, basically. They're the only difference, as far as I'm concerned, between flat Earth and young Earth creationism is that the Earth has been known to be a sphere for far longer than evolution has been known to be true. And
Yes.
so at this point, serious discussion with the flat Earth ended thousands of years ago.
I I will hope that the creation versus evolution debate will end in 3,000 years.
Oh, I don't think it will take that long. It's diminishing even in the United States.
Yes.
Young Earth creationism probably. I don't think it'll be during. I don't think it'll go away in say anyone who's now alive's lifetime. But I think that like maybe 4 or 5 generations, it'll probably be essentially at least as fringe as like flat Earth. People just won't take it seriously.
Oh, if we get to Japan's level of evolution acceptance in that amount of time, I would be more than happy.
Yeah, it's trending that way. I don't think it's going to reverse. Science things that are demonstrably true from science tend to percolate into the public eventually,
Mhm.
and I think it's just a matter of time. The United States isn't even in last place when it comes to that. I think the last bastions of creationism will be in places like Turkey and Iran.
I think it's going to be even more backwards than that because you've got a lot of third world oceanic and African communities that are even more into the spirits or something made the world for us.
Well, even then, I mean, there are a lot of people who aren't anti-evolution who still believe in some creative force or whatever.
Uh, I'm speaking specifically about created us as we are
Oh, right.
instead of created life and then life diverged into spiffy dressed ceratosaurs and blue skinned admirals.
Hey, wait. Technically, aren't you supposed to be an extraterrestrial from the Chiss Ascendancy?
Yes, and I am doing some reconnaissance on Earth. So
Okay.
far, I am afraid that Earth does not qualify as a hand syndicate planet. So,
Darn it.
independence for a little while more.
All right. So, about how old were you when you started to change your mind about young Earth creationism?
So I started having my doubts in 2016. That's 4 years ago. I was about 23.
Okay. Now, what was it that first gave rise to these doubts? What was the first kind of clue that, hey, maybe there's something off about the whole young Earth creationism thing?
So that actually started with doubts about uh, what the Bible says itself. I was in a point in my life where I was thinking, if what we think about the Bible is indeed correct, then it should hold up into scrutiny. And so I searched for critics of the Bible, and Bart Ehrman was one of the first things to pop up. So I listened to a couple of his lectures, and then I listened to a couple of his colleagues' lectures, and they're saying the same thing, but Bart's an atheist and his colleague is an Episcopalian, and they're both saying we don't know what the original manuscripts of the New Testament said. Here are the differences that we do know between the first scraps of manuscript that we have until our first total manuscript. And here's the difference between our first total manuscript versus what was put in the 1611 King James. And that got me searching deeper and deeper into, well, if the New Testament is this wrong, or what I've been told about the New Testament is this wrong, what is it about the Old Testament that I've been told is wrong? And I found inspiring philosophy, and I found out that he accepts evolution. And so I started trying to harmonize my faith with the scientific facts.
Okay. And so, um, there's an immediate question of to what degree can we say that these texts are like the originals? At what point does that filter into questions about things like the age of the Earth or evolution? Was it pretty immediate, like, oh, then maybe we're wrong here too?
It was over a couple months because I was brought up in a house that's very much the Bible is literally accurate. And when it says that it will not change one jot or tittle, it won't change at all. And when I've got this stack of differences that is the Gospel of Mark has 9 additional verses, that's a pretty big jot. And so it was a bit jarring to me. And so finding aspiring philosophy for as long as I had probably kept me in for a couple weeks at least.
Okay. So, were there any? So, I guess was currently you're not a Christian.
No.
Okay. Was coming out of Christianity something that happened sort of simultaneously with abandoning young Earth and anti-evolution things, or was there a period where
So
you gotten rid of the old Earth, I mean the young Earth and anti-evolution, but you were still a Christian?
leaving Christianity actually happened first. I was I had just had a very horrible day, and uh, I I don't know how to put it, but I was putting up what everything anyone who said that there was a God posited versus what I knew about reality, and they didn't mesh. Uh,
Okay.
and so I was just kind of in this limbo of there's too much to this world for there not to be something, but everything that I've been told it is can't be right. And then I find Trey the Explainer, Voice of Reason, and there is another one. Uh, the guys that do This Week in Evolution or
Okay.
7 Days of Animals or whatever, and
Oh, 7 Days of Science.
7 Days of Science. Yes,
Yes,
the
I
guy.
think that's Benji Thomas, which is named after the channel's founder, but he's now basically partners with I think 2 other guys.
Yes. So those channels I started looking into, and they were explaining what evolution actually is, how all this works together and what the basic misconceptions are. And after a while, I found out that, um, see, because there are people that I knew what they were talking about, like Aaron Ra and Logic. And I was very turned off from those people because I was still very fresh from Christianity, and I had run-ins with them before, and I didn't like their style. Aaron came off as very combative, and I knew that I was going to be turned off from anything he had to say about evolution because of the way he presents it. So I then found Vice Rhino and you and Erica, and they're these very friendly people who are very knowledgeable about the subject. And I'm like, all right, so evolution is how life diversifies. Awesome.
I think actually you might be the first person who cited me as a significant influence in that. So that's very flattering. Because I feel well, part of it is I just feel like I haven't been around long enough to have had that huge impact. But
Well, I mean, how many videos did you have about a year and 3 months ago?
a fair few actually. I was
Okay.
already into like I didn't have my current schedule, but I was trying to get up one a week, and which day of the week it came out on was sort of up in the air. But
Hmm.
like at that point, I had already done some of my earliest stuff, like my stuff about homology, my stuff about what is an evolutionary grade versus a clade. I'd done, I think maybe what good is half a wing with Dino Attenborough, who got very mixed reception, by the way. Some people love Dino Attenborough, and some people
Yep.
did not love Dino Attenborough.
Oh, and I don't know how I forgot this, but Bill Ludlow. Bill Ludlow was very big. I
Oh yeah,
found him before I found you.
yeah. And actually, I don't know if you know, but this show is me trying to do as much as I can to kind of take up the mantle that Bill left behind.
Yep.
So, because I was originally going to be on his Leaving Young Earth Creationism, but well, I was scheduled to be on only a few days after he unfortunately
Yeah.
passed away. Um, by
That.
the way, guys, we do have a Q&A section for these. We do hold off until either an hour or an hour and a half in, depending on how the conversation is going. I will be getting TD Land's question in first because it is a super chat, and so that's going to be coming in first. But if you have questions right now, I'm not going to be asking them. So if you want to make sure that they get in first, feel free to super chat them. Otherwise, I'm going to, once I say that we're opening up questions, that's when I'll start looking through non-super chatted questions, starting from that point on. So if you have a question, either super chat it now or just hold on to it. And we usually get through all the questions by the time we're done. So I just want to put that little point of scheduling out there. Okay, so now has leaving young Earth creationism and I suppose also Christianity, has that caused friction with your various relationships?
Yes. So after I left Christianity, I tried to attend church for a little bit just for my family, but then it got to the point where the things being preached and the things I accepted about reality uh, didn't line up. Things about accepting people as humans versus what the Bible says how we should treat them. I, um, except for some gracious intervention from another family member, I was going to be kicked out of the house, and I could not afford to be on my own. It's different people suddenly started wanting to talk to me, but I quickly found out that it was just so that they could Pascal's wager me or try to convince me that creationism was still somehow true and more logically plausible than evolution. It, and it was a lot of unfortunate bridges I've had to, I wouldn't say burn, because I've never tried to aggressively sever the connection, but there are just people that we've agreed to not talk again. Though there are a few connections that I thought that I was going to lose, that we still chat in a friendly manner every so often.
That's good. Yeah, that's it. It can be rough, especially if you are still living in a home where, I mean, you don't have any particular rights to stay there against the will of, whoever's putting you up there, and
Hmm.
they are very much against your current intellectual journey, I suppose. And actually, this is just advice to anyone. If you want someone to come around to your way of thinking, especially if it's a family member, kicking them out and being angry with them and disowning them, not the way to do it. Um, yeah, it's not going to be very effective. If you want someone to come back around to your way of thinking after they left it, maybe showing empathy and kindness is going to be a better bet than being angry and threatening. So, just a little bit of a rhetorical advice there. So, one thing that I would like to know is you said that for a while you were not really a Christian, but you were sort of still sympathetic to the various creationist arguments. Um, what kinds of were there any specific arguments or facts or explanations that helped you push away that whole still sort of in the young Earth boat?
So one of the things that pushed me away from the young Earth boat was learning about what kinds of deposits each of the strata are and the difference between strata and laminae, because that's
Okay.
one of the things that Kent and Ian prey on, is that they will call laminae strata and your average person does not know the difference.
Right.
And so when they say, look at this polystrate fossil, and you're like, but that's an entirely limestone deposit, you and I are going to see that as one strata,
Right.
but because there's so many defined laminae that you can distinguish easily, your average young earth creationist audience is going to think that those laminae are supposed to have taken hundreds of thousands of years to deposit. And we all know that trees don't stand for hundreds of thousands of years.
Right. But they can stand for decades, and over
They,
the course of decades, multiple inundations can occur.
yes. And just finding out how we tell what kind of environment different sediments were laid in, and what should have keyed me off, because I love science. Like, sciences in college were one of the things that I excelled at, and it wasn't even a young earth or not type thing. It's just do the math, make these observations, and write down your report. And I was great at that. So many of the laminae, in fact, too many of them, are not mudstone in order for the strata that are supposed to have been laid down by a flood to be laid down by a flood.
Right. Yeah, actually, I don't know if you know. Actually, I assume you don't, because I think only a few people know. But my next upcoming sort of debunk series is actually all going to be about geology and flood geology and why it doesn't work. So
That'd
that
be awesome.
that's the first video is already completed. I'm currently working on animating and rendering out the second video. The third video, I'm going to be using some third and fourth video are going to be using some nice, wonderful fan art submissions that I've gotten. And oh, hey Maya, welcome back, Maya. So there you go. Um, so yeah, actually, I've been having to get a lot of consultation about geology because I'm not as knowledgeable. I'm not as confident about geology as I am about, say, like when I talk about dinosaurs. Like when I talk about dinosaurs, like I double check, but I at least know where to find everything. And when I double check, I'm like, oh yeah, I was right. Okay, good. But with geology, I'm like, I'm not even sure where to check on this. So I've been getting a lot of help from some friends of mine, especially Corporal Anon, who are into geology. And so I want to say thank you very much to that. But if the age of the Earth and how we can know, even without radiometric dating, the Earth cannot be 6,000 years old is something you're interested in, check out that series. It's going to be called Creationism is a Mega Catastrophe. It's based on the speech Mega Catastrophes by Dr. Tasman Walker, which he gave at the Creation Conference in Seattle in 2015. So that will be great. I think you'll love it, Thrawn. And I think anyone else who's really into the geological side of things will enjoy it. Because I talk about a lot of different formations and why we know they can't be formed by a single worldwide flood, and how Taz's predictions about the flood are not actually borne out in the real world. So that should be fun. Now, what about evidence regarding things like common descent or the theory of evolution in general?
So the thing that got me on common descent super fast was ERVs. Because once I found out exactly what ERVs were and how they work and how they helped us identify the fusion site in chromosome 2, because as from what I remember back when I learned about chromosome 2, ERVs helped us find it. We knew it was going to be somewhere on there, but looking for certain ERVs helped us find it.
Yeah.
And knowing that chimps have this ERV and humans have this ERV, but gorillas don't. So we know that chimps and humans are more related than gorillas are. And I think that there are some species that have the same ERV, but it's in a very different location. And so we can tell that they were infected by a similar virus, but at a very different time.
Yeah. Well, it really is one of those things where it's like you can just hand wave a lot of genetics off by like saying, oh, it's a common designer. Like, okay, but did the common designer decide to stick for apparently no reason a viral genome in the same place in these two unrelated organisms when there was never actually the actual infection of those organisms by that virus? And in many cases, it's a viral genome that you can actually, if it accidentally activates, will actually cause a disease.
Yes. The reason humans can see blue is the same reason humans get eye cancer.
Yeah. So there's a lot of just like, this doesn't really make sense from a common design standpoint.
Yes. Also, how many copies of the Neonog gene do we need?
Usually, I would say 2 is enough for most genes.
But is 12?
Yeah, no, probably not that many. Oh, and by the way, hello, Max Letov. Nice to see you here. I don't think I've seen you in chat before, so welcome. If this is your first time, and if it's not, I just haven't noticed you. And I don't know how I wouldn't notice you because I don't normally have to read Cyrillic. So
you amaze me every time you can read or speak another language. I do not have enough props to give you.
Well, thank you. So it doesn't come up a whole lot on the channel, but yes, I do spend some time in linguistics, and I've learned enough to be able to at least pronounce a lot of various alphabets and stuff. So, and we got Planet Axolotl, who also I feel like that's a new name to me. So, welcome to you too. I like to especially greet people who I don't recognize. So I don't recognize you two as having been here before. So welcome, Max and Axolotl. And an intrigued feline. Stop showing off with your 5 languages. Actually, the number of languages I speak, I never actually just give a number because I speak different languages in such wildly varying degrees. Mm-hmm. Like my French is way better than, say, my Arabic. But I mean,
I've heard you do Arabic before. I've seen you read it on stream, so I would say that you can put Arabic in your list.
Okay, well, that's generous of you. When I go to actually just sit down and read a block text of Arabic, it feels significantly like I shouldn't be putting it on my list.
But I'm the same way with Latin, but at least I can sort of know what I'm reading when I see Latin.
Fair enough. All right. Oh, and yeah, it is nice to have a stream at a reasonable. So I try to do Saturday stuff around noon my time. And actually, next week with Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal, we're going to be starting 2 hours earlier than this started. So if you're in Europe, that's going to be a great time. We're going to be starting at like 7 p.m. or something, like London time. It'll be great. So yeah, just stick around for that. And that's one of the reasons I try to do Saturday stuff early, is because it's a weekend, so my U.S. viewers can tune in if they want to, right? It won't be during the middle of their workday or something for most of them. But it's also early enough in the night that my European viewers don't have to feel like they need to stay up until 4 a.m. to watch my stream. So, oh, one of the languages that Intrigue Feline does speak is sign language. Actually, I have a deaf cousin who I hung out with a lot as a kid, so I picked up a fair bit of sign language. And my father, his degree was in deaf education, so he had to learn sign language very well for college. So I actually do have a bit of American Sign Language, which doesn't come up very much, and I usually don't even list it because, I mean, online it's kind of useless, but...
Mm-hmm. Especially if you have a cheap, comes with a computer webcam like I do, its hands go too fast.
Yeah, you can't even see what's going on. All right, so ERVs, yeah, that's a really good one for the common descent. I feel like if you can understand what an ERV is and then be shown the distribution of them throughout any one lineage, it's really hard to deny the common ancestry in that lineage. And Hominidae, which is, all of the great apes, is a big part of that. But even so, you can go even farther back, right? Like, yes. You can find Archontan ERVs, and you can find Archontoglire ERVs. So you can find ERVs that you share with mice, but that you won't share with, say, dogs, because mice are much more closely related to humans than dogs are. And so the common ancestor of mice and humans was infected with some virus that made it to the cell, or the germline cells.
The
right?
gametes.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't actually always have to be the gamete. So the thing is, it has to be germline, right?
Oh,
so let's say that you're still a little blastocyst, right? You're a little sphere of cells. None of those cells are gametes because they're all stem cells, but some of them are stem line or germline cells, right? Because some of those will eventually divide and divide and divide, and eventually some of them will become gametes, or they will be the cells that give rise to gametes. So if they're infected at that point, then it will make it to your gametes. So if there's an embryological infection in germline cells, that will eventually mean that it is in the gametes.
So I could be half ERV, half non, but my children are going to be fully ERV'd. Right.
In fact, actually, during embryological development, every time your cells are splitting, right, there's going to be a few different mutations. And very early on, those mutations will leave basically a phylogeny within your own cells, because some of those cells that divide will go on to make certain parts of your body, and other cells will go on to make certain other parts of your body, each of them carrying with them their each unique somatic mutations. But only the ones that end up in the germline will be ones that you can pass down.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so you can actually, if you're very careful, you can keep track of things like that. And one of the ways that scientists study that is with C. elegans. It's a tiny little worm, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a nematode. And the nice thing about C. elegans is it has a certain number of cells. Every adult individual C. elegans, I don't remember what the C stands for, so forgive me. That's why I'm starting with it. It has a certain defined number of cells, excluding gametes, which they produce and stop producing. But and so now we know, starting from the single fertilized egg, which then divides, and once it divides, we know exactly which cells are going to be produced by each of those two cells, and we can trace them all the way through. And so you can do things like trace mutations through the full development of C. elegans to see how the somatic mutations can build up over time. And then, because the basic idea of embryological development is the same across all animals, or at least all eumetazoans. Sponges are a little bit off on their own weird line, doing whatever they do. So at least if we go with all eumetazoans, you can trace how this works. Canorhabditis is what C stands for. There's a reason I don't remember that one.
It's
uh,
that's like with me and the footprint that the Delk track, the dinosaur that supposedly made the Delk track. I can never uh remember how to say its name.
yeah, I don't know if I know either. I don't think I do.
It starts with an A, I know that.
Yeah.
But also when you look up the actual dinosaur and prints that we know from that dinosaur, and you compare it to the Delk track, you can tell which one was cut with a cookie cutter and which one was left by an animal.
Yeah, some of the supposed human tracks in dinosaur trackways are just really bad.
So I don't know if you've ever watched the video of it, but Ian Juby has a video on his channel of they took the Delk track to an institution and they CT scanned it. And if you don't pay too much attention, you'll walk away from the video thinking that the track is legitimate. But if you do pay attention, you'll notice that they focus entirely on the human track. And the human track is authentic, I do believe. The big toe is a bit wonky and deep, but whatever. You watch the CT scan of the dinosaur track, and it doesn't have any compression around it. The dino track itself is what the fakery is.
Aha. All right. Fair enough. Yeah. See, I haven't looked too much into that particular thing, mostly because I did a lot of stuff with the what do you call them? The tracks, the Paluxy tracks,
Mm-hmm.
and like that was enough for me to be like, all right, if someone else comes to me with a new dinosaur track thing, I guess I'll look into that too. But that was enough for me to be like, that's probably not something that's seriously worth going into. And this isn't a question, but I want to read it real quick. It's a $5 super chat from Ilya Moon, which, hello, Ilya. It's wonderful to see you here. And she says, Dapper is the best dino, heart. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And TD Lane, don't worry. We are going to get to your question, but I'm going to get to it in the question and answer section as the first question, which is actually coming up pretty soon. So, okay. Now, how do you feel about the various creationists who had a big influence on you in your childhood? Like, do you feel like they're honest actors? Do they upset you? What's your thing on them now?
So after I got through the period of feeling lied to, I started looking back, and Ken Ham may be an honest actor, but the people around him I know are not. Andrew Snelling has several papers where he does honest, legitimate geology, and then he has his AIG papers, and they are written very differently, and there is definitely things he's leaving out so that he can come to his young Earth conclusion. And Georgia is a geneticist, and she knows when she's leaving things out or adding details that weren't in the original paper. And you know she knows this because whenever someone else on the panel says something about genetics wrong in a way to do young Earth creationism, she'll look at them funny sometimes, and you know that she knows they said something wrong, but if they said it correctly, then all of a sudden evolution's on the table.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. She's, and it happens a lot. And I think Georgia and Andrew Snelling are they're the most dishonest types that work for places like AIG, where it's like, I know that you know that this is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't possibly have gone through your degree program without knowing why this is stupid. Yep.
But they get paid, so they keep doing it. Ian Juby is an interesting case because I thought for a couple months after leaving that he was still an honest actor, and then I watched Potholer's video on him, and then I watched several other Potholer videos, and I think Logic has a video on him, and he used to have videos that he was a part of back in the early 2000s, and then he disappears for a little bit, and then he comes back in the early 2010s for Genesis Week, and then he falls off in like 2015, and then all of a sudden he comes back in the last little bit of 2019, early 2020, and so I have this feeling about Ian is that he'll hide while he's got too much heat on him, and then he'll come up to do his little creationist bit, get a core following, and then when there's too much hate or people are exposing him too much, he'll dip and hide again.
Yeah, he does seem to come back in waves. It is interesting. I think you might be right that he sometimes just gets too much heat, and so he goes away for a bit. So, do you think that most of the professional creationists that you were aware of are honest about their beliefs and what they're telling people, even if they're mistaken, or do you think they're actively dishonest?
The average creationist, I would say, is honest, just misinformed. But the ones that are teaching it, like Kent Hovind, I would have to say are dishonest.
Okay. Yeah, that's generally both the impression that I get, as well as I think what most people who've been on the show have said. I don't think anyone has been on the show and said, "Oh yeah, I think Ken Ham is totally an honest actor. He's arguing in good faith." He's just not. I actually am less clear about some of the middle group where you get these. They're not professional, but they're amateur, and a lot of times they're on like Reddit or YouTube or something like that, and where I know they've been exposed to corrections that they have not bothered to take on board. But on the other hand, it's not like they're really making any significant amount of money on. Like they're not a Ken Ham, right? Who's just raking in millions from
right.
rubes who sent like I don't know if you know, but he recently he did a GoFundMe for the Ark. Then he laid off a whole bunch of people from the Ark, and then he secured a low interest emergency business loan. And it's
That's
just like
scummy.
And it's just really all just in a row, right? And so like it's very hard for me to believe that he is in this for anything other than the money.
Oh no. Okay, so then what is like a bit of Orange's motivation?
Yeah, see that's the tier that I wonder about. Like, does a bit of Orange really think these things? Because I know he's been corrected in a lot of stuff, and he does not bother to make any corrections or double check the sources. So I don't know if people like a bit of Orange are honest or not. I would like to think that they are, but most of them seem too smart for them to actually be fully honest. Maybe they're just intellectually dishonest with themselves.
Maybe, yeah, cognitive dissonance is a thing because Mike Winger, I don't know if you know about him. Do you know about what do you mean?
What do you mean? That does not sound familiar.
Okay. Are you familiar at all with inspiring philosophy?
Not very much, but I am aware of him.
Okay. So he is a Christian philosopher and apologist, and he is in a loose group. It's not like they do God Squad Power Hour type stuff all the time, but every so often they're like with Capturing Christianity, having a chat or whatever. And out of the four of them, Inspiring Philosophy is the only one who accepts evolution. The other three are creationists. And so I've always wondered why doesn't, or maybe he does and we just don't get to see it, why doesn't Inspiring Philosophy tell these people one of the reasons Christianity is losing so many people and it's accelerating in the West is because they're so heavily associated with creationism, and it's like the Kent-Hovind version of creationism, where if you're not a creationist, you can't be a Christian. And so you get people who are like me, and If it's not one, maybe it's not the other, and then it all just falls apart. That's
Okay.
how Apologia was.
Yeah, I actually do notice that the more stringent a Christian group seems to be on saying no, we have to be young Earth creationists, or it's not, you're just not a Christian or whatever, the less likely someone is to realize how badly incorrect creationism is and then still remain a Christian. Like, for instance, I know of several former young Earth creationists who who went to my church, and some of whom left young Earth creationism while still attending the church, and that wasn't something that was completely hidden up. And there was confusion from some of the other members of the church, and there were arguments, but I don't remember any of them ever being said like, "Well, we clearly aren't a Christian anymore." And I know that there were a number of people at that church that I went to as a kid where people had they were talking about other churches as, Christian groups that were not young Earth creationist groups, and they were not rejecting their Christianity. So I feel like my church, even though it was a young Earth creationist church, it was less hard line on that matter. Whereas there are churches that are very hard. Like, this is the Christian point of view, is young Earth creationism.
Yes, our church had a lot of drama concerning various different things, because if you're not this guy, we were relatively loose in the what we accepted as Christian behavior, but if you weren't in this, you either need to make a public church apology, or we are going to ask you to not come back for a service.
Yeah. And actually, Smitty, I will keep that question in mind. The question and answer period is probably coming up in just a few minutes, but because Smitty asked how I define Christian, and I actually have more than one definition, and it depends on the context that we're speaking in.
Same.
So I think that'll be an interesting question to talk about. But so actually, I think at this point, people have had some questions, and unless there's anything, actually, one thing I would like to touch on that you mentioned was you said that there were a couple of people whose videos turned you off to some degree when you were still a young Earth creationist. Would you like to talk about that?
So Aaron Ra, he had, I think he had the beginning of his
Systematic classification of life.
Systematic classification. He had that out, and I was going to watch it, but then I was like, no. I've seen the phylogeny challenge. I've seen a couple other of his videos. I don't like him. I know he's probably right. I know he knows his stuff, but I'm gonna straight up call it vitriol that's in his voice at some points. It was more than enough for me to know that listening to him was going to turn me off for good. So I actively went searching for less combative evolution content, and that's how I found Trey the Explainer, Voice of Reason, and Bill Ludlow. Logic was another one that I wasn't too interested in. I had heard about some of his stuff. Creationist Cat had basically abandoned his channel by that time, but I still didn't really like his format, and at that time, I was watching Armored Skeptic for other reasons.
Okay. Yeah, so obviously I have nothing against Arn Ra or Logic. In fact, there's been some talk between Logic and myself about trying to get some video or something together. We're just not sure what to do or what format to do it in or anything. So it's a little up in the air. We've seen a few videos here and there, so that maybe we want to cover, but it's still up in there. So this is me saying, like, I'm in no way trying to diss these people. In fact, one of them is someone who we're both trying to think of something to do together as a collaboration. So, but I will say it is the case that I think there is some value in having a multitude of different takes on things. Some people really respond to the the in your face, here's why you're wrong, here's, all that. Oh, and we have what do you divide euros into? What's the part of a euro? I don't even know.
I think euros are just a little less than $1.
No, I mean the parts of a euro. Like someone said,
Oh.
0.99 euro. I don't know what the 0.9, like in the US they're cents, but I don't know what they are for euros.
I don't know, euro cents?
For 0. Well, I'm just going to go with for 0.99 euros, Zach Brannigan sends a $ happy face, and thank you very much. And I'm going to have to find out what those things are called. But get that.
Oh, they're just called cents.
They're just called cents, huh? That is lazy.
Well, I mean, the $cent is just a pence from the English pound.
Okay, well that's fair. Oh, and I wasn't worried about the. I know approximately what the exchange rate is.
Oh,
but I was just like, what do you
call it? Was the other way around? It's
fluctuated here and there, but the euro and the dollar are usually pretty close to each other. There's been times where they've diverged significantly, but they've always been like if you take the running average, they usually run pretty close to each other. Actually, it doesn't matter. So thank you for that. Sorry, I didn't know they were apparently called cents. I don't know how to distinguish them verbally. So I don't have anything against Aaron Ra either. I do think that he sometimes gets off of his topic and goes into places like history where he is not as good. He's been doing that less lately, and I appreciate that he's doing it less. And when he does do it, he's been getting people for whom that is their topic on. So I appreciate that he's kind of helping with that.
There are a couple of his videos where I'm looking at them and I'm just like, you say this person didn't do this historical thing when it's quite well noted by third-party sources and his enemies that he did.
Yeah. So I feel like Aaron Ra is he's great on phylogeny and cladistics, and I don't begrudge him his somewhat abrasive or combative attitude when it comes to creationism, because I sympathize with it, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some areas where I think that he could stand to check himself a little bit better. Also, we have for $10 from Speed of Sound of Gravity. I was going to use this money to get a refill on my insulin, but then I saw that you had a live stream. Well, thank you very much, Speed of Sound of Gravity. It is appreciated. And we have a new member, Lamont Stewart, who has joined at the Amniote level. So I'm going to be sending you a link to the member/patron Discord server, Lamont. I'll probably just send it to you on Facebook because I'm connected with you there. But thank you very much. That means that we are also now only 3 members away from getting the Mothra emoji. So if you want to be able to send Mothra emojis, 3 more members. I can't do math apparently. And then Michael Apple says, helping out with income inequality. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that for $5. So there you go. But yeah, so what I was trying to say is before we got into the specifics about Aaron Ra and Logic, is that I think that there is some value to having that diversity. Like I think myself. Oh, sorry.
I would agree. I just think that the quieter ones need to be more. I'm not going to say that they need to be more upfront. It's just that revealing that there is indeed a balance of the aggressive people that educate about evolution and the more friendly people needs to be something emphasized.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the problems is that, well, I'll be honest, the more aggressive, less, shall we say, family-friendly type thing is the kind of thing that gets a lot of sympathetic views. So if people really want to see the good creationist bashing, look, Logic is more entertaining than I am. It's more fun to watch that.
Yes, a poorly written noir sketch is more entertaining than a technical breakdown of why these bones are shaped this way.
Right. And so I get why it is that that is what tends to be easier to grow in terms of a popular channel. But I feel like we have to have the extra technical side and the side that is not overly aggressive. And sure, I'm sometimes a little snarky, but I can't go overboard because I don't want to turn off people who are not sympathetic to me from at least listening to the message. And so part of my hope for this channel is, which apparently is in some degree working by your own account, is that I want people who are in fact creationists to be able to come here and at least hear out the arguments. And maybe it might not instantly change them, but at least they'll have some opportunity to say, well, at least I've heard the other side in a calm and sourced and relatively rigorous way. So, but I think now we are going to start opening it up to questions, and I'm going to start with a super chat question that came in from TD Lane, and then I'm going to go back up to Smitty's question, which was, how do you define a Christian? We'll get back to that. So at this point, what I'm going to go ahead and say is, if you want your question asked, please put it in the chat. I will be going through them in the order that I get them, except that if there is a super chat, it will be the thing that I read first. Like if super chat comes in after I finish the current question I'm on, that will be the next thing that comes up. Like I said, we usually do get through all of the questions. So if you are worried that your question won't get answered, and that's the only reason you're super chatting, it's probably not necessary. But if you do feel like you want to super chat and you really want to make sure that the question gets in there, then feel free. So here we go. The first question is super chat from TD Lane for $5. A question for both of you to answer. If you could bring back any one genus of extinct organisms, which one would you choose?
I am stuck between anomalocarids and trilobites. Specifically trilobites once you start getting to the fancy headgear. Okay.
Actually, I was thinking about this a little bit earlier, and I know that most people would want me to say something like, Tyrannosaurus or Ceratosaurus or, something that seems to fit. But honestly, I think I might want to bring back Drepanosaurus, mostly so that we can do some tests on it to see what the crap a Drepanosaurus is. Because
which one baffling.
Is that? Drepanosaurus is sort of like a lizard sloth from the Triassic.
Oh, yes. That one is freaky.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing, is that no one really has a good idea as to what a Drepanosaur is. So if I could bring back a Drepanosaurus and help clear up that question, because actually it's a very old video of mine, but I did an after show for my Kent Hovind debate with a paleontologist named Alex Rubenstahl. And we talked a little bit about Drepanosaurs, and we were saying, like, what would be like on your fossil wish list? And I said a stem Drepanosaur, so we can figure out what the heck those things are. If we could find a primitive Drepanosaur, I would be extremely happy about that. So yeah, that was what I would go with. And TD Lane also said that his choice would be one of the trilobites. So
because they're awesome. They are C4 cockroaches.
I mean, kinda. Smitty would bring back the dodo. I mean, that's a fair. I mean, it's just a pigeon.
A very fat and awkward pigeon.
Yeah. All right. So the next question that I know that I wanted to get to, because I remember it and it was fairly recent, and I think it was actually a really interesting question, is from Smitty, and we are in the Q&A time. And Scott Duke, don't worry, you were going to be the next one I get to, but I already started the Smitty one, so don't worry, I will get to your $4.99 super chat. Thank you very much for sending it in. Smitty had asked, how do you define a Christian? And I think the question was directed at me, but I want to get both of us in there. So, okay. Thrawn, what do you think first?
So I've got three different definitions depending on how specific we want to be and the cultural/social context. Christian can be anyone who follows the base tenets of Christ as laid out in the gospel, or even as perceived to be direct in revelation. Christian can be someone who follows the tenets and social norms of the area, reading the Bible, at least verbally accepting the core tenets of Christianity, something that most young Earth creationists and fundamental Christians would be would consider a pew warmer, or even to some extent a Christmas, Easter, wedding type person, as long as they accept Jesus as some supernatural entity that controls an aspect of their life. And the last one would be the fundamentalist view, someone who believes in the Bible as a whole is God's direct word, and that Jesus is the sacrifice that's come to remove sin from the world, and we need to accept him in order to have our sins forgiven.
Okay. So I have probably two basic definitions. So I have a broad one that is the sort of largely inclusive, which is basically if Jesus is the central figure in your religious system, then you're probably a Christian. And so that would include a large number of groups, including mostly more traditional Christian groups, as well as things like Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian Science, Mormons, the Moonies, which that's a bit of a rude name for them, but whatever, it's a cult. I don't care that much. Yeah, bit of a yeah, but that would include all those groups. It would probably not include Baha'i or Islam, because they have figures that are more central to their religion than Jesus is, even though both of those groups incorporate Jesus into their religious views. So I would not normally count the Baha'is or the what do you call it? Muslims as Christians. I have heard some Christians claim that Islam is a quote unquote Christian cult, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So
that seems strange to me.
Yeah. I've certain, some of them put it in a similar category to like Mormonism, where it's like it's a weird offshoot of Christianity, and it's like,
that to me, in my
really.
understanding, that displays ignorance of the founding of Islam.
Yeah, I tend to agree. But I also have a somewhat more narrow version, which is that there are a core set of beliefs that are the predominant historical interpretation of Christianity, going as far back as we have reliable records for such things. And they include things like the divinity of Jesus, the sacrificial death and later resurrection, and a few other related things. I don't actually think the Trinity necessarily has to be one, at least not in its typical modern conception. But so there is a narrower set of things where, like, you have to think that there is a divine nature for Jesus, and there's that salvific work on the cross and the resurrection as being the thing that seals that whole thing. And then, as a sort of a third one, I also understand the argument from not quite the fundamentalist Protestant, but the a slightly broader group, where you could get groups like the Oriental Eastern Orthodox churches, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Protestant Church. And there are a set of shared beliefs in all of those groups. And I would say that's probably the narrowest I would go, is if you have the shared beliefs that they all have, but not necessarily the extra beliefs on top of that some of the other groups might have, then there's that. So yeah, those are my two major, and my one, if I really want to have that particular context where I talk about that much smaller, or not much smaller, but still the vast majority of Christians, but that smaller subgroup. But on the other hand, like for most of the time, if someone just says I'm a Christian, I don't care enough to dispute that. I will say, though, that people who do not accept the actual truth claims of any Christian group, So you get these people. I think the most famous and most controversial one was Anders Breivik, who was a Christian who was also an admitted atheist. He just liked going to church and he liked Christian culture and he thought that it was a binding aspect of European culture. But without actually accepting the truth claims, I don't think that you can say that you're a Christian. You can be a fan of Christian art and history and ritual, which is fine. You know, there's a lot of great Christian art out there. You don't have to be an actual literal Christian to appreciate it. But I don't think that that counts as being a Christian. I think you actually have to have a belief.
See, if he accepted the truth claims, he would be a pew warmer.
Well, yeah. All right, so our next thing that we're getting in is a super chat for $4.99 US from Scott Duke, who says, "Can you give some tips on how to analyze/appreciate a dinosaur skeleton when visiting a museum? I visited the Field Museum and felt overwhelmed." So I can tell you what I do. I don't know if Thrawn, do you have any input on this?
Yeah, but you go first.
Okay, so some of the things that I like to do when I visit a museum is one of the things I do is I like to look at some of the things that I know take an animal and put it in the dinosaur category. So one thing you might look for are things like see which fenestrae the skull has. Does it have a promaxillary fenestra? Does it have a antorbital fenestra? Does it have the superior and inferior temporal fenestrae? Check for those things. You know, get a sense of what the skull is doing, because skulls are always interesting. Another thing you can look at is things like what kinds of teeth does it have? Does it have a dental battery like ceratopsian, where it's just got these rows stacked together of all these peg-like teeth? Does it have like the spatulate teeth like a sauropod? Think about what that might mean for its diet. Are the teeth inset from the edges of the jaw so that there might have been some kind of fleshy cheek material that would help with oral processing? And if not, what does that tell you about how the animal is processing food? Other things you can do are look at things like look at the hip structure. Dinosaurs have very unique hip structures. Take a look at stuff like that. You can also take a look at the feet and maybe compare it to some modern animals. For instance, if you're looking at a big, heavy animal like a sauropod or a ceratopsian, you can take a look and say, does this actually look like modern, and I'm going to use a technical term, graviportal, which means just extreme weight-bearing animals. So like graviportal animals today, the best example I can come up with is probably elephants, then rhinos and hippos are other examples from different groups of animals. So we've got an Afrothere, we've got a Parasauroctylon and an Artiodactyl in there, and they all have slightly different adaptations. But all those adaptations are also different from what you get in ceratopsians or stegosaurids or sauropods. So you can look at some of that stuff. You can also look at things like what does and doesn't the mount include? Does it include the gastralia? Does it have a sternum? Does it have areas where it spells out which parts are reconstructions and which parts aren't? And try to think about where reconstructed parts, like how reasonable is the inference about the reconstructed part of the animal? Usually the answer is pretty reasonable, but there have been some pretty big surprises over the time as we found additional parts of previously described but incomplete taxa, and we found out that we were wrong about our reconstructions, or we had to add something new. So those are some things that I would take a look at to help you appreciate dinosaur skeletons. But also, but also, feel free to just be impressed. I mean, they're cool. You can have that emotional reaction and enjoy that too. Don't feel like it always has to be just about the cold facts about the animals in question. Feel free to walk into a room with a Brachiosaurus mount and be a bit awed at just how gigantic it is, or a room with a Carcharodontosaurus mount, and feel free to realize what a scary creature that would have had to have been in life. And so, Thrawn, what do you got for us?
So I like to look first at the teeth, see if I can't tell what kind of creature this is just by looking at its mouth. I especially like to see what muscle attachments are possible on the mandible, because those can also help you know, is this like Carnotaurus? It has very secure muscle attachments on the mandible. This thing has a massive bite force. Without even looking at the teeth, I know that this is a carnivore. Whereas looking at something like Ankylosaurus, this is a grazing animal. Look at its locomotion abilities. Ankylosaurus doesn't have a lot of room to move its feet. It's not going to be incredibly fast unless it undulates and needs to move. Which, I don't know, if Ankylosaurus could undulate its body that much because of the osteoderms that's protecting its back. But figuring out how these dinosaurs could have moved brings the fossil to life for me, and imagining them eating the herding grazing animals and the more lonely grazing animals and some of the predatory or scavenging dinosaurs like the smaller raptors helps me do that. But also comparing them to their living relatives. I used to have, don't anymore, a little raven skeleton, and comparing that to some dromaeosaur feet, you will see a whole lot more comparable bits than you sometimes expect to see.
Yeah. Yep. All right, that's awesome. All right, we also have another super chat from Vandali1998 who says, "Not sure why my membership had my real name pop up. Probably because you signed in on a different device to a different account and joined that way without noticing it was signed into a different account. Similar things have happened to me. But as for a question, what is something Thrawn used to consider as a want you see that he can't believe he used to believe, I guess, now? So is there anything that's just you just can't believe you used to believe that?
That all of the geological layers were somehow laid down by a flood, when, especially now, I know we have salt domes from lakes that took thousands of years to evaporate. It's the KT boundary is another thing that just screams there was no flood. I remember Ian back in his Genesis Week had a video where he mentioned that the reason the Yucatan crater couldn't be the meteor crater for that wiped out the dinosaurs was that it was too round.
What?
Yes, because I don't know if you know this, but when meteors that size hit, they tend to explode, and explosions tend to leave circular craters.
Yeah, actually I've heard a similar thing from a number of like various sort of like weird like Flat Earth and Velikovsky and stuff like that, where they'll say things like, "Oh, why are all these craters circular?" when obviously most impactors aren't going to impact at exactly 90 degrees. And it's like, well, that's true. Most impactors will not impact at exactly 90 degrees.
But they explode.
But not only do they explode, but even if they don't, most impact angles actually result in a circular crater. You have to get very low impact craters before you get oblong craters. So yeah, it turns out there's a really good name. Good reason.
And that's also how we know that the Tunguska event was a comet that passed through Earth's atmosphere but never struck the ground.
I did not actually know that was the case.
No, so what most likely happened is that as the comet is going through the atmosphere, a chunk of it breaks off and gets deep enough into the atmosphere that it detonates and flattens several square kilometers worth of trees in the middle of a swamp.
Nice. Okay. So it wasn't aliens?
No, unfortunately not. We had nothing to do with that.
Damn. All right. So we have one from Icarus, which is actually I want to double check that I didn't miss any before we get to Icarus's. Sorry. Let's see. All right, we have one from Zach Brannigan. At what point does a cult become a religion?
I would say when it has enough political sway to affect the zeitgeist of at least a city.
So, for me, I think one of the complicating factors here is that there are, especially in conversations around things like Christianity and young Earth creationism, and like we also had in the discussion about what the good definition for Christian is. One of the problems is that there is a definition for cult that is prominent in especially Protestant Christian circles, where a cult is a group with continuity to historically more conservative Christian groups, but that has gone away from something that the Christian in question has seen as a core Christian belief. So, for instance, there are oneness Pentecostals, right? And they are Pentecostals who do not believe in the Trinity. Instead, they are modalists. And a lot of Protestants would describe oneness Pentecostalism as a cult. On the other hand, there's the more general definition of a cult, which is a destructive group, which may be religious or not, but which is essentially it's an abusive relationship between the leadership of the group and the followers of the group. They are often religious, but they're not always. And so, but on the other hand, also, people sometimes refer to fringe religious groups, whether or not they are abusive, as cults, simply because they are small or fringe. I try to restrict it to that abusive thing, right? So I don't care if it's small or fringe. If there's an abusive relationship between the leadership and the membership, there's a problem with it being a cult. Now, if the question is when do religions stop being fringe and unusual, it's essentially once they reach enough of a sizable population that it becomes politically untenable to treat them as fringe.
Mm-hmm. Also in the chat with Icarus, I do have two different definitions of cult. The bite model helps you understand a political cult, but there's also religious cults which start off as smaller gatherings for religious purposes. And I took the Zach Brannigan question for the religious gatherings. There can be the political cult type things going on in a religious cult. If that helps.
Yeah. All right. We also have from Icarus, do Christians have to believe in the Trinity? Only for the most, for me at least, only for that most restrictive definition. I very rarely have that as my defining point. But if I'm in a context where I'm discussing things like Christian theology from the standpoint of the more traditionalist groups of Christians, then you might be able to argue yes. But I would generally say I don't particularly care. What do you think, Thrawn?
You're going to have to start getting into a deeper discussion about heterodoxies. I'm going to say no, but for the fundies, that they very, the Baptist at least is a very heavily Trinity-oriented type of Christianity.
Okay. Icarus asks, why do people write me? I assume he means my name with a C.
Yeah, people forgetting that he spells it with a K in the chat.
Yeah, so I want to answer this actually. It is largely because Greek myths filtered into the Anglosphere largely through Latin translations, and Latin habitually transliterated Greek kappa with a C. It's also why most Americans are more, up until recently, were more familiar with the Roman names for various gods than they were with the Greek ones, which has now changed. Around my generation, most schools started using the Greek names for these various figures. But yeah, it's the same reason why Hercules is more commonly known than Heracles in the United States. Let's see, what else do we have? Okay, an intrigued feline. I'm moving on with the Q&A. I gotta get through the super chats, man. Come on. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I'm just checking the chat.
You're fine.
No, there's just a chat. An intrigued feline. Yeah, if you have a question from earlier that I'm not remembering, which is probably the case if it's much earlier, then yeah, please ask. So Smitty says, so the Catholic Church is a cult. I would say,
Heracles is son of Zeus, not Jupiter.
yeah, that is correct. Heracles and Hercules are essentially the same character, but Hercules is the Latin version of the name, and Heracles is the Greek.
Yeah,
I would say that there are certainly some arguments that can be made that the Catholic Church is a cult. However, I would say that that is not necessarily true of the entire organization at all places and times. Recently, they've certainly been doing less than they should to ensure that there is not an abusive relationship. However, the abusive relationship is not a pervasive or defining characteristic of the organization. So I would say that currently they're in a bit of a gray area when it comes there. They're certainly dangerously close to being a cult, but I also know of a lot of Catholics who do not have a abusive relationship with their church hierarchy. So it's a little iffy. And then Islam is pretty abusive in Islamic countries. I will agree. But also, one of the complications with Islam is that it isn't an organization. Islam does not have a hierarchy like the Catholic Church does. Various like law councils and muftis and imams and stuff, they tend not to answer to some single organization. And even things like Islamic colleges or schools of jurisprudence are more like schools of thoughts and scholarly organizations than they are like a hierarchy. So that's one of the complicating things with Islam. So it's more accurate to say that some Islamic countries are able to use Islam as a reason or justification to abuse their citizens, and some Islamic congregations are cults. But the problem with saying Islam is a cult is that Islam isn't really a single thing. There isn't a single hierarchy. It's just a collection of various groups of different size which agree or disagree with each other to different degrees. So I think that's one of the complicating things there. And that was a comment from Smitty that wasn't a question, but I felt like it deserved commentary. Do you have anything to add there?
No, I would pretty much agree with that. The thing with Islam, I would say, is a lot like a lot of the Protestant churches, especially in my area, because Virginia is the head of the Bible Belt, and so you get some of the more mainstream people who they can't really afford to have an abusive hierarchy, but then you also get some of the really weird 50 or fewer person churches that result from a town split and a town split and a town split, and they can be very structured and I don't want to say it, but there was a church not too far from where I live that had a Mason-esque thing go on. And luckily, Manson-esque, and luckily nothing bad ever happened.
Okay. 1 second. Okay, so all right, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm not missing anything, but I'm scrolling down. So I have the StreamYard's chat up, and I also have my YouTube Studio chat up, and they're not quite synchronized, or I'm at that same place in both of them, so whatever. Mm-hmm. So let's see. From Random Evo Times, will I get a blue wrench after we talk on my channel? So blue wrenches are something that I have of late been rather stingy with. Basically, I tend not to give them out unless I see a need for moderation that's not currently being met. So I think in the last 4 months, I've added maybe 2 blue wrenches. So talk with me outside of this, and tell me why you think that I need additional moderation and why that would be you. And if I agree with you, then I will. But if I don't make. I mean, it doesn't mean that I don't like you or I don't want you here or anything like that. It just means that um, I need to keep my number of moderators at a point where I know who they all are and can contact them if I think they've done something wrong or I want them to do something else. And right now, I feel like my moderation is pretty well on point. So it'll probably take a bit of convincing before I say, yeah, I definitely need another moderator. But there is a reason why I've added everyone that I have added. And when I was first starting out, it was a little bit more free just because I needed to get some moderation in there. And these are the people who were the most regular and the most dedicated to being on my live streams. Since then, though, I've significantly pulled back in how free I am with that, just because, well, not everyone needs the wrench, and I don't want to have to keep track of a whole gaggle of moderators because that can be like herding cats. Let's see. So from an intrigued question, my question was in regards to whether Thrawn is trying to keep up and learn all the stuff like evolution. Oh yeah, like are you continuing to study evolution and keep going with that?
Yes, it's one of the things that one of the goals I have for myself right now is that whenever the phylogeny project site is up, and I think it's still undergoing a reshuffling at the moment, but I always try to start at Biota and find Homo sapiens sapiens without getting lost. That is my current goal. I would also like to be able to say phylogenetic names and not mess it up. Like I think I was chatting with you in the comment section in one of your earlier videos or on Twitter or something, and we were talking about how AIG is like, oh, all of the dromaeosaurids and troodontids are birds now.
Yeah, which they were not saying not that long ago.
No kidding. And I said troodonts instead of troodontids, and I really want to be able to get the head group and everything under it names correct, because
Okay.
I know Troodon. I've loved Troodon ever since I found out about it, but Troodonts is not the proper word for everything like a Troodon.
Yeah. Okay. And how are you trying to do this? What's your...
So my current resource is watching people who know what they're doing on YouTube. I'm currently reading through The Rocks Were There, and I am piece at a time reading the Google Docs versions of a couple biology textbooks, which is boring. It's very boring.
Yeah, look, science can be dry and boring sometimes. I can't tell you how many times I've been looking at some paper about paleontology, and then it comes to the section where it's like, here are the measurements for phalanges. It was like, and there's a table full of phalange length. And I'm just like, oh my god.
I don't have time to take out my calipers to figure out how many thousandths of an inch difference there is to determine if this is a new genus or not.
Right. But that's the thing about actually doing science, though, is it's not the glamorous thing that you see in like the movies where like, oh, some crazy genetic engineer is going to do some fancy thing. Like, no, that's not what normally happens. So we also get this from Zach Brannigan. I think this is in regards to the Catholic Church, and I would say there are certainly groups and individuals in the Catholic Church that produce cult-like tendencies in their area. I don't know that it's universal. And there are some areas where the Catholic Church is decidedly not cult-like. For instance, they have almost no information control. So one of the big parts of the BITE model is information control. And that essentially does not occur in the Catholic Church. So there are other areas, like they tend to have very low amounts of financial control. They do some behavior control, but not nearly as much as you expect from most cults. So there are a fair few thought-stopping techniques. there is some financial control, there is some behavior control, but then again, that's going to be true for any organization with an ideology. So I think it's probably more significant in the Catholic Church than it is, say, in most political parties or something. But yeah, I would say the Catholic Church has been veering towards cult-like tendencies, but I'm not ready to currently say that it's a cult. We have from Andreas Eld. I'm not exactly sure, Andreas, how to say your last name. I'm sorry. Feel free to put in like the International Phonetic Alphabet pronunciation, and I will get it from that if you can. But is Trinity actually from the Bible, or is it simply Christian tradition? Thrawn, what are you going to go for first?
So this is one of those heterodoxy things. The Trinity itself is found explicitly only in one passage. It's the Johannine comma, and that we know was inserted. Is that Erasmus, or is that the other guy that starts with an E? I forget.
I believe. I mean, I know that Erasmus. I believe he had it in his translation, but I believe it started before that.
It's the guy who says, if you have a Greek manuscript with it in it, then bring it to me. Otherwise, I'm not going to include it. And
that was Erasmus, yeah.
Yeah, because he was making some very good translations of the Bible into Latin, and some church fathers were mad at him for not including it. So they translated from Latin into Greek, and then added the Johannine comma, and then presented this new Greek manuscript to Erasmus, and he included it in his next transcript of the Bible.
Yeah.
That is my understanding.
Yeah, the Johannine comma is certainly the place where the Trinity is most explicit, and it is definitely not part of the original manuscript. There is no one who thinks that is part of the original manuscript. Also, I think StreamYards is confused about how much money certain chats are, because remember that 99-cent euro chat?
Yeah.
It put that in the red color as if it were $100 US or more. So that's not how that works.
That is not. Maybe it just doesn't know the color codes. I don't know.
Well, it also still has it up as a top chat inside the internal YouTube chat on this, which means that it's treating that like it's $100 plus super chat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So StreamYards apparently does not know what to do with that super chat. Luckily, YouTube does. But let's see. So for me,
Eusebius, that's the other guy that I was going to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Trinity is not something that you can find explicitly spelled out in the Bible. It is certainly something from Christian tradition, but then again, so is the Bible. I think that's one of the things that we can't forget, is that the Bible is not something extrinsic to Christian tradition. It is something which was written and compiled, and at least the New Testament was written and compiled and canonized within Christian tradition. It was not as if the New Testament plopped down out of heaven and then people picked it up and became Christians. There were Christians before any book in the New Testament was written. Now, is the Trinity in the Bible? I think that you can make reasonable arguments that are pro-Trinity from the New Testament, and also comparing what it says to things in the Old Testament. I do not think you can make an airtight case that is what the New Testament is teaching. However, I will also say that the degree to which early Christians were Trinitarian it's not easy to ascertain, but we can say that the earliest times that we have explicit mentions of the Trinity, it seems to be a very widely accepted idea, even if it's not always formulated in exactly the way that a modern conservative theologian would like it to be.
Yes, there are very different types of Trinity too.
Yeah, so trying to reconstruct the exact theology in what we might use in modern terms for the very early centuries of Christianity is very tricky. But there are certainly Trinity-like ideas from very early on. Like if you get the Apostolic Fathers, which are pre-Nicene Christian writings, so things like letters of Clement of Alexandria, I have it on my bookshelf. Whatever, just look it up. It's on Amazon. You can get the whole thing. It's like $30. The Apostolic Fathers. there are a lot of things that will lend themselves to Trinitarian interpretations in that. So the Trinity is certainly something from Christian tradition. How far back into Christian tradition it goes and how recognizable it would be in, let's say, the 1st or 2nd century, it's a little bit harder to say. Let's see. And then Michael Apple just says, yeah, you can, I wouldn't necessarily say you're necessarily quote mining the Bible, but yeah, you can find passages that seem to support the Trinity in the New Testament. I don't know that you would have to be quote mining all of them. I think some of them are more ambiguous than others, and some tend to lead themselves towards Trinitarian interpretations, and some don't. I think you can be intellectually honest and argue that the New Testament does teach the Trinity. I also think you can be intellectually honest and be skeptical that it does.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But then again, I mean, I'm not here to tell you what to believe about the Bible. You do you. Unless you're telling me something completely false about it. Like, did you know that Acts 23 talks about Daffy Duck? No. No. Like, if you're going to be that blatant about it, I'm just going to say no. But for the most part, I'm not here to tell you what to believe about the Bible. Tabernacle, what's a piece of ancient history you both find interesting? Ancient history equals before 1 BC. So technically, I guess the birth of Jesus would count as ancient history. What do you think, Thrawn? What's your...
I would actually like to go way back. I forget if this event is somewhere around. No, actually, screw it. I would go even further back than I was originally thinking. I would like to see actual interactions between Homo sapiens sapiens and Homo sapiens neanderthalensis.
But we're going into prehistory then.
That's still ancient.
But it's not history.
Okay, so if we want to go stay in like written accounts, I would like to see how the Persian War between Xerxes invading Greece actually played out.
Okay. Yeah, that would be interesting. And one of the things is that, at least for a long time in Western civilization, this was seen as sort of the triumph of democracy and freedom against the horrible oppression of the Persians.
Oh, no, that's a very poor way of seeing it.
Right, but that's the thing is that, like, okay, but most of the Greek states weren't democracies. Only some of them were. And the ones who had the biggest hand in defeating the Persians from a military standpoint were certainly not the democratic ones. And in fact, they then later went on to conduct the Peloponnesian Wars against the democratic states and largely win. So
I don't know if I would say that Sparta won.
Well, they certainly didn't lose.
No, but Athens certainly came out on top.
Well, that's true.
Athens would go on later to dominate all of politics in the Hellenic states.
That's true, but it was not because they conquered the Spartans.
No, it was not strictly because of that. Yes,
it was mostly from shrewd political maneuvering and holding the treasury,
and having one of the most important temples in the region.
Well, yeah,
inside the city walls.
That does help. But also, if you look at the Persian Empire, there were some pretty progressive things for the time going on there.
Yes.
For instance, that women had much greater property rights in the Persian Empire. There was a very high degree of religious freedom in the Persian Empire.
If you want to go with women's rights in political spheres, then Sparta comes out on the equality scale there.
I mean, not as high as, say, Persia does. Women were definitely doing better in the Persian Empire than they were in Sparta, but they were doing better in Sparta than they were in Athens.
Could the Persian women buy off the government?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, I did not know this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so were they legally allowed to? No, but could they send bribes? Yeah, because many Persian women became independently wealthy as a result of doing things like owning businesses.
See, I didn't know that. I just knew that there's a lot of poor life choices that Sparta made because the heiresses just threw money at the I forget what you call it. The seers that the two kings of Sparta went to see. The heiresses would just throw money at them and say, "No, we're not going to war this year."
Well, so in Persia, one of the big things for the status of women was that they were. The assumption was simply that women were allowed to own property independent of husbands or fathers. So there were plenty of things like businesswomen in the Persian Empire who just were independently wealthy on their own merit because they were allowed to own property and make contracts and all that stuff. So they were allowed to just engage in entrepreneurship and become wealthy. Now, granted, most people, including women, were dirt poor because it's ancient history, and that was virtually everyone. But
yes,
I mean, among the exceptions were women who became wealthy on their own merit. So, and of course, once you're wealthy, it doesn't matter that much whether you're a woman or not. If you've got the money to throw at politicians, you can throw it at politicians, and they're going to do what you want. No matter how much they might otherwise in public say, no, you're in some inferior status or whatever. It's the same thing where in the United States, generally speaking, businesses were not a big fan of segregation because they were totally okay with getting that African-American money.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, yeah, we'll take your money. And the government was like, no, you won't. And they were like, well, I guess we won't. That's why a lot of the first challenges to segregation were actually sponsored. And by sponsored, I mean like monetarily sponsored and paid for by various companies, especially public transit companies.
Yes.
One of the first challenges was actually a challenge to the segregated rail system. And it was the legal fees were paid for, and a guy was hired by a rail company to legally challenge segregation on rail because they were sick of it.
See, if Vanderbilt hadn't had a massive monopoly on the railroads, that wouldn't have been possible.
Question for Thrawn. Any regret about the Battle of Atoll?
Yeah, we needed that orbital bombardment to last a lot longer so that they didn't have any transports to get into space with.
Well, that's why you bring more bombers.
An entire starbase was destroyed by one lucky kid because I didn't bomb the place hard enough.
Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll slowly enough that StreamYard is just snap me to the bottom, which it does sometimes.
No, that's okay. I'll keep talking. Also, I would have liked more heavy support for my troops. Being so heavily infantry focused was a mistake.
It did snap me back down at the bottom. Let's see. There was a question that I know I saw. I'm not sure what this means. Yes, especially that dapper dude. He always seems to be her, not only early, but all through the stream. Does that have a context by anything?
He's supposed to be. He's usually here. Not.
Well, of course I'm here. It's my stream. I'm not sure exactly what is that. Danish debater. If you want to put a clarification, let me know, and I will make sure to get that. Let's see.
That would
okay.
Because Icarus was talking about you. It's almost like he came here from 150 million years ago and never left. And then Danish was like, that would explain some things, and then went on to do that quote.
Oh, okay. So we got from Andreas. Again, I'm not entirely sure how to say your last name. Sorry. Dapper Dino, where in Genesis do I find the answer to how do we drive, or do we drive on the right side of the right? I can't talk. On the right or the left in this country? You don't.
I like the answer that Danish gave, though.
What's that?
Genesis 2:123. On the fifth day, the Lord made traffic rules and saw that it was right.
Nice.
So obviously, drive on the right side of the road because the Bible is literal.
Oh, yeah, we had a little bit of a hiccup thing, I think, there. Okay. Sorry about that. So we have an intrigued line, and it might actually be the last one on Super Chats because we are coming up on that 2-hour mark where I cut it off. Might have missed, but do you still have some permanent tendencies or ideas or behavior that stems from the YC period to which you were then indoctrinated to do?
And I already know the second part of that question.
Yeah.
So no, there was no dietary restrictions. I mean, like alcohol was obviously we don't drink or smoke because that's what the sinners do. Um, but
You should find a Russian or an Arab church and see how much drinking and smoking goes on.
no, every time you make that joke during Kent with Ben or Eric with Erica, I'm just like, yes.
Yeah.
Um, but there's not really, except for one major one. There are some times where I take claims at face value, um, and then later I'm a little bit more skeptical. I would like to see myself be just a little bit more skeptical, so that I actually have to go and do the research to make sure that claims. Usually, I'm talking like fantastical claims or uh, scientific novelties. Like not too long ago, there was a paper published that we could about how we could see the after effects of the black holes in the universe that formed our universe. So what it seems to be is that there was some smaller black holes orbiting a larger black hole, and they all collided and tore a big enough hole in reality to send matter from that universe that then ended up being our Big Bang. And that may or may not be what the actual things we're seeing are. I still need to look more into that.
All right. So I think that is going to be our last one. Like I said, unless we get a last minute super chat, in which case I will extend just because you tossed money at me, so I got to do at least that. But we're going to do some wrap up stuff. So Thrawnmulus, do you have any last thoughts before we head off air?
Not too many. I think this was a really good chat. I don't know if there's anyone who really needs to ask me other questions. As far as I know, my channel comments are open. You can get me on Twitter at James Manhunter, and I'll respond usually within an hour.
There you go. If you want, send me the Twitter link, and I will add it to the description in case.
Okay.
Now, as far as for me, I'm just going to do some quick channel stuff so you guys know what's going on. I did go through most of it at the beginning of the stream, but some people may have joined and other people dropped out, so I don't know who was here there then. So we'll go back over it. So Tuesday should be Kent with Bent 31. No, I don't have a title for it. I have a few that I'm tossing around. If you have any ideas, let me know. 2. There's going to be the final episode of Fluffy Dino Lads is coming out Thursday. Then Saturday is going to be a discussion with Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal. He's a geneticist and a virologist and a professor. He's going to be on the channel to talk to me about viruses. What is a virus? How does a virus work? What can we learn about viruses from our current situation, and what can what can we learn about our current situation from the viruses? Like, how the interaction there. So if you want to learn more about those things that are almost alive, viruses, check it out. That should be at 10 a.m. Pacific on next Saturday, so a week from today, until about probably noonish. So basically from about 1 p.m. Eastern to about 3 p.m. Pacific. If you're in Europe, I don't know. Check out the time zones. I can't keep track of that many time zones, guys. Then the Tuesday after that will probably be another Kent with Bent. There is always the possibility there might actually be something else like Landon with Lyle or Eric with Erica, or Corporal Anon has been wanting to get in on some Tuesday stream. So I'll probably have to talk to Bent about that, see what he wants to do. Then the Thursday after that is going to be Noah's Zookeeper, the movie. If you missed any Noah's Zookeeper, or you just want to be able to watch the entire thing without having to click a whole bunch of times on YouTube, it's right there. It's like 2 hours. It's like an hour and 59 minutes long or something like that. So if you want to watch that whole premiere, bring snacks. It's going to be quite the thing. Then it's going to be, I don't know what's going on that next Saturday, but then after that, there should be a new series starting called Creationism is a Mega Catastrophe. It's all about geology. So if you want to hear the craziness about flood geology, tune in for that because it's going to be the start of a new series. It's probably going to be at least 4 episodes, maybe 5. I don't know. But yeah. And so in between all that, there's also going to be work on the Speculative Evolution project. And if I get enough done, that might push out the schedule like a week or so as I pop out another Speculative Evolution project video. So, but I have to get ahead on my other projects that are easier to do than that. So that way I have a buffer zone. So if it takes me a little extra time to work on the Speculative Evolution, I have other stuff coming out. So that's why there's been not much Speculative Evolution work, is because I need to increase my buffer of extra videos that have been uploaded but not premiered. So that way I have time to actually work on the Speculative Evolution. And yes, Creation is a Mega Catastrophe is the Taz Walker thing. So I think that's it. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. Thanks for watching. And I want to say a special thank you to all of my super chatters and my new members. So we've got super chatters, TD Lane, Ilya Moon, Zach Brannigan. I almost said Zach Brannigan. Sorry about that. Zach Brannigan.
No relation.
Right. Speed of Sound of Gravity, Michael Apple, Scott Duke, and Vandalia 1998. Sorry. And I also want to say thank you to our newest member, Lamont Stewart, who joined at the Amniote tier. Please remind me if I don't send you the link, which I'm planning on doing like almost immediately, to the Discord. Remind me to do so, and to make sure that you have the automatic roll is the correct one at that level. So there you go. I will talk to all of you later.